Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. This episode is sponsored by our friends over at Hippo Education. Quick question. When was the last time you felt you were fully up to speed on the non-stop updates in pediatrics? Let me guess. Never. That's where Hippo Education's Pediatrics Reviews and Perspectives podcast comes in. Your monthly pediatric cheat code. Fresh, up-to-date insights from pediatric clinicians who live and breathe the same challenges you do. No fluff, no boring lectures, just practical knowledge you can apply on your next shift. The best part, you can listen and earn CME whenever it works for you on your commute between patients or during that rare quiet moment. So, if you're ready to make staying informed easier, check the link in the description or visit hippoeducation.com to try Hippo Education today. Good morning, George. It's another Tuesday, and we have two incredible guests and friend of ours on the podcast today.
Yes, today we have the infamous Chip Hart from PCC and the medical director of Office Practicum, Dr. Dan Feiten. And we have a fascinating topic that we're going to talk about. The link to finding the cure for type 1 diabetes could simply live in your EHR. We just don't know about it. Take it away, guys.
So Chip and Dan lead the U.S. two largest and best pediatric-focused EHRs. They both have a personal connection to type 1 diabetes, and many in the community are committed to preventing DKA and getting to the cure. Together, they serve between 5 to 10,000 pediatric clinicians and 8 to 12 million children in the U.S. Dan, Chip, it's always a pleasure to see you both. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks.
Chip, why don't we start with your personal connection with type 1 diabetes?
Sure. I think I'm probably the newest member of the extended club. I have a child who showed up with type 1 out of the blue last year, about a year ago. And it was quite a surprise. He was the model of health, ate well, doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and then lost almost 30 pounds in a few weeks and diagnosed himself, actually. He showed up and said, "Need a ride to the ER. I think I'm in DKA," which I suddenly Googled and learned all about. And I use him as my primary resource on learning about this. And I realize I am by far the biggest rookie and novice when it comes to any of the information here, but I'm acutely conscious of a journey now that so many families have been on that it's a journey that's frankly invisible to anyone who doesn't know about it. And I don't know, the courage and perseverance of these families who deal with type 1 diabetes knocked me out. Our family's very privileged. We're very lucky, and I know people and I can ask questions. My kid is very disciplined and capable. So we get in the cards of life. Yeah, we got dealt the T1D card, but all the other ones came up all right and we're okay. But it's glued me into opportunities that we have in our space to make the lives of humans better, which if we don't work in medicine, for that purpose, what are we doing? When you said, "Come on, Chip, I'm working on this project. Would you participate?" You know what I said right away. I said, "Here I am." Meanwhile, then I learned that Dan Feiten has this massive story that he's going to share. I was like, holy moly. And the fact is PCC and Office Practicum, we've been frenemies forever. We know, and we've been in the same sandbox forever, but to have this one theme tie us together I'm actually quite interested. So I'll shut up. Dan's got a bigger, better story. Yeah.
What's your personal connection to?
So I've been connected to type 1 diabetes for almost 30 years now. I have 4 children. 3 of them have type 1 diabetes. All 3 of them developed type 1 diabetes before they were 2 years of age. That was back in the days when we had glucose monitors, but certainly not CGMs. We certainly didn't have the ability to track and monitor blood sugars. My wife and I had some binders that were 3 different colors. And literally we wrote down our kids' blood sugars every day, six times a day, did 3 to 6 blood pokes a day. And it was 1 to 3 insulin shots a day. So it was a pretty rigorous situation. We became very close with the folks at the Barbara Davis Center in Denver, which I will just give a plug because they are one of the best diabetes centers in the world. And we were very fortunate to be living in Denver and to be around some incredible people. At the time, I think they only had one other family in the entire state, had 3 children with type 1. And later we learned that several of the family members also have celiac disease. So I've been on the Children's Diabetes Foundation board for many years now, and I am obviously an advocate for where we need to go with type 1 diabetes and with some of the exciting stuff coming up in terms of technology and possibly some capabilities to prolong the onset of type 1. The future is very bright, and I think Chip and I are really excited to be talking and working and thinking and visioning how we utilize the EHR to help bring better care to kids with type 1.
So I think this is a wonderful opportunity that highlights the beauty of the pediatric community, not just the type 1 diabetes community. It's our commitment to make populations better. And we're always willing to come together and share knowledge and best practices to make sure that the kids get the best break possible, because everybody in this podcast and all the companies that we represent are in this for the kids. So thank you for joining us on this. It's a wonderful experiment I think we're going to have today. I want to start a little bit with redefining type 1 diabetes today. So George and I trained at a time where type 1 diabetes was you lost weight, you peed a lot, you ended up in the hospital, you need insulin. There was nothing else. That's as much as we knew about the disease. Today, this disease is an autoimmune disease that starts very early in life. It's an insulitis that attacks the beta cells of the pancreas. And the autoantibodies peak at 9 months to 18 months of age. And you go through 3 distinct phases. One where you're euglycemic, stage 2, you are dysglycemic, and stage 3, you are in need of insulin for survival. And stage 4 now, according to ISPAD, you have chronic diabetes that needs insulin. And the important to me as a pediatrician about that is that other than churches and the pediatric office or the family practice office, 9 and 18-month-olds don't go anywhere else. So the bulk of this work is going to be either done at community faith organizations on the weekends where the moms come in with the kids and they get screened, or they're going to be done at the pediatric clinician's office. And I think it's very important for people to understand why the disease and the thinking and the definition is evolving. And that's the importance. We need to catch these kids early. And people ask, why screen everyone early if we don't have a cure? And when we talk to the researchers, there's probably 2 or 3 reasons. Number one, if you screen early, you can prevent up to 95% of episodes of DKA at presentation, which sets you up for a much better outcome for the rest of your life. Quality of life, survival, longevity, and the amount of money you're going to spend, obviously. Number 2, in order to be effective at what you guys are talking about, which is delaying the onset, using some experimental therapies now, the immune sensitivity studies, cell transplantation, you need to diagnose these children early in the process before their beta cells are depleted. So what the patients and the researchers will tell you, it's all about beta cell preservation. The more beta cells you can preserve by not landing in DKA, the less episodes of hypoglycemia you have, the less of an insulin need you have, the better quality of life you have, even if there's no intervention. When we get these data points and we can hand them over to the researchers, then they can move along to getting us closer to what we want, which is better outcomes for all of the population. And that's why I'm fascinated, because between the two of you, you have about 12 million kids in your database set and almost 10,000 clinicians. So we could really be very impactful if we're working together on multiple different strategies to get these kids screened, the pediatricians educated, and the right data to the scientist. So Let's start with a simple question. How do you think, Dan, that we can work together as a community to make this a reality?
I think that Chip and I would both agree that people tend to think about the EHR, the electronic health record, and really that's the wrong terminology. And Chip and I think a lot alike in a lot of ways. And I facetiously tell some of my folks at OP that we need to change our perspective and be thinking about it being an electronic health manager. And when we think about the products that we put out, when we think about the services that we provide, it's all about how we enable pediatricians, pediatric clinicians to manage. And there aren't too many other EHRs, frankly, that are focused not only on pediatrics, but focused on management from the perspective of prevention and tracking and treating. We're very good at asthma action plans. Trust me, in the next couple of years, PCC and OP are going to have diabetes action plans. We're going to have pre-diabetes action plans. We're going to have diabetes action plans, etc. And this is the way our brains think and where we are going in the future. I don't think we're going to have any luck, Chip, convincing everybody to go to the terminology of EHM versus EHR, right? But that's the way that he and I think privately that we need to be. And that's why we think that there are opportunities in diseases like diabetes to really make a difference through the EHR.
Your thoughts, Chip?
I agree. The fact is, EHR vendors, we sell sadness. Historically, we have. No one wants to use an EHR, except for the biggest nerds. You want to engage with the patients. That's why you went to med school. You get intrinsic reward from actually helping people. The EHRs, like even at our best, Dan and I, we are hamstrung by the requirements that the federal government puts into place, the state government puts into place, and the big bad guys, the insurance company. All right. Most of the time when George goes and sees a patient, he's a click monkey for Blue Cross or United or whoever else, because he has to click these things and do this stuff, some of which has to do with actual care. But most of the time, you're proving that you didn't cheat on your coding, all right, which you don't, pediatricians just don't, and that you were doing some sort of community or like large scale health measurement, all right, that is not usually done very well. What a pediatrician wants to do is help kids. And we are finally at a point, and we're at this horizon where some of the communication among the EHRs, and it's not the EHRs, the communication among the health systems, the hospitals and the labs and the players in the room, they're finally getting to a point where we can exchange data sometimes. And when that happens, this is what Dan was talking about. When that happens, and he gave a really good specific example. I bet I could go out and talk to any one of my clients right now, any one of my clients who's knowledgeable about type 1 diabetes and say, help me build a care plan for this. And I get a decent one. Okay. Problem is, how do you get that into the hands of your patient? How do you get that care plan approved by Blue Cross Blue Shield to be the thing that you check in on every month and get paid for? Because it's not appropriate to ask you to keep doing work for free. It's all of those other elements. And we are starting to get close to that stuff. We have portals now. We have better web developed tools that make it easier for you to maybe not just contact and work with this one family, but talk to the 50 families in your practice. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what did Dan Feitan have to do when he wanted to manage the type 1 diabetics in his practice? 3 of them he had dinner with every night. But the other 24, he had to pick up the phone and call those moms. And that's a big pain. That's a big pain. Now we're getting close and we're starting to get real impact. And I'll say this, we've already seen a massive improvement in the volume of, or the coverage of well visits nationally. All right. The well visit coverage 15 years ago was pathetic. All right. And everyone complains about all the, about all the work you have to do during well visits. But you know how many kids we catch with depression screening every year, even though we're still pathetic at it? We catch those kids and fix the problem before it ends up in the news. That's what we're talking about here, which is screening kids for diabetes so we can catch them before it's too late and improve the study work that needs to be done. And so these kids can keep their endogenous cells and actually have a chance of putting this in our rearview mirror. Like this is the first time in my life where I've actually been like, oh my gosh, if we could put this in the rearview mirror for all of these families, what's that worth? That's so much more important than, is it a 99213 or whatever silliness that we have to worry about in our space that you guys have to worry about. This is actually saving lives and changing lives. We're on the cusp of it, and it's exciting. It only took me, 35 years to get this job, but here we are.
The clicking part of the EHR, a lot of people don't like, but I think that's where the important part of the EHR is. That's where your diagnoses and the population health comes in. The nuisance,
you have to do it right. You have to play the game right.
Yes.
the nuisance
Unequivocally,
the nuisance part is the white boxes, the storytelling and the plan. That's what takes time, and that's what physicians hate. If you can somehow get rid of that, I'll gladly click all your boxes because it takes me 2 minutes and I can still talk to people.
I think what we need to do is show the connection between those boxes that they click and the outcome. Like when you do this right, when you keep track of things clinically in your practice, what are the advantages? How are kids being helped? Right now, it's too much. They told me so, and I got to click these things. You don't know. You don't get feedback. You can't tell. And we were talking earlier before we started about some of the data that, I brought some data to the table today. And the data doesn't tell the whole story. We're looking at this one piece, this narrative that shows, please don't hang anything on this because we don't know what it shows. But it shows that the incidence in at least PCC client practices, I want to be very clear about what I'm saying. The incidence of kids showing up in PCC client practices with DKA the last year or so has gone down quite a bit, but the incidence of kids showing up with hyperglycemia has gone up quite a bit, which is those two things are separating. There's so many valid reasons for that happening, some of which are good, some of which are not good. And I can't tell because the way we use EHRs, that narrative is hard to discern. Each one of you, as physicians, said it could be this and could be this. And at each time we were like, yep, it could be. Okay, it could be that kids with DKA are not going into the practices, they're going straight to the ER. And it could be that the practices are getting a little bit better at identifying hyperglycemia earlier, so it's showing up in the diagnoses. It could also just be that more kids are getting T1D, which we have evidence to support. And so that's why we're seeing more hyperglycemia. It could be a couple things. And in order to figure this out, when you take all the kids in Dan's network and you take all the kids in PCC's network, there's enough data there that we should be able to understand stuff, but we need the doctors, like Jordan was saying, we need the doctors to click the right boxes so we can connect the dots.
Correct.
So the first thing that you guys could do together would be to try to get the number of type 1 diabetes in both of your registries.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's identifying the current population within both EHRs. How many kids do we have with type 1 diabetes? How many siblings do they have? How many siblings do they have of a particular age if we decide that we want to screen kids? And we'll talk about screening here in a minute. And I would also add that we have to think about other diseases that are related to that. And so we have to not only look, in this case, at kids with type 1 diabetes, but how many siblings have celiac disease? Or how many kids have celiac disease? And are those kids that a clinician should consider with certain histories and certain situations? Do I want to screen the other siblings for not only autoantibodies for celiac disease, but really think about type 1 diabetes? And it's that ability of using a pediatric EHR, which is thinking broader than just type 1 diabetes, but the connection with celiac disease. So you're right, Herb. We want to identify the populations, and the specific related diseases and conditions. I'm really excited about the capabilities to do that.
So that first step seems to be pretty simple from a mechanics point of view, right? You just run a query. We don't know the quality of the data, right? Somebody forgets to put somebody could say syncope as the initial diagnosis for a type 1D at presentation with DKA because they passed out and sent them to the ER. But we would get a general idea of how many kids. And I'm guessing it's going to be something every year around, I think it was 2 to 4,000 kids in all of your network, all your data sets that have stage 3 type 1D. Now, a little more complicated, which is what we were talking about earlier before we started taping the show, is how many of those children presenting with type 1 diabetes are in DK? And that gets a little more complicated because most pediatricians don't measure pH off the blood. We're not blood gas machines in the office, so we don't really know who is acidotic, who's not at the time of presentation. And the way a lot of these data exchanges work, and please correct me, I'm not in the EHR space, but if they go in the PICU and the PICU puts the DKA as a secondary diagnosis, that may not be showing on any of my billing charges going out of my office EHR because I'm not billing for that DKA episode in the ICU.
And you make a good point, Herb, because it might come back from the children's hospital or the local hospital with a diagnosis of DKA. Fortunately, with care quality now, we're getting much, much better data and more relevant and more accurate data. The question becomes then, does the clinician understand the importance of documenting things like DKA? And it's what George suggested just a few minutes ago. It's a little bit of a garbage in, garbage out situation, and we have to rely. The EHR cannot think about what it should be. It's going to rely on the clinicians to document properly.
Because I don't like ECW, and I say it over and over again. For the life of me, I wish I had or PCC in these clinics that I help. But in the process in ECW is if Fairfax Children's Hospital sends it electronically, right? There's this one bucket that you click on it and it says all the diagnoses. Then you click on it, then it carries it over to the problem list. Then you got to click on it again to put it on your assessment of the patient, right? And if you don't know that it's back there and the data enters changed, hidden on the right side of the screen, you're never going to see it.
We've got another issue that never got resolved, which is the coin of the data realm is still billing data. And the reason for that is because it is highly regimented. You have to use an ICD-10 to bill. You have to use a CPT to bill. The data elements are, even with all the payers still being inconsistent and annoying, there's still only 40 fields on that claim. Like it's pretty straightforward and everyone has to bill. So all those interactions the issue is that the ICD-10 wasn't even designed for billing, but that's what we use for billing. SNOMED codes, which are designed for clinical narratives and problem lists, are where we should be understanding this stuff. But EHR vendors are loath to actually incorporate SNOMED codes properly because none of the users want to actually diagnose using ICD-10 and then come over here and properly do it using SNOMED. As Dan will tell you, we all hide that stuff behind the curtain. Now, we think we do it the best way. I'm sure OP thinks they do it, but everyone does it a little bit differently. What that means, though, specifically, let's say, Herb, that one of your patients is at home over the weekend, crashes out of the blue, goes into DKA, goes to the ER. They diagnose, he's got keto without coma. You've got T1D diagnosis for the first time. When that kid comes back to your office, all right, you are not going to bill for ketoacidosis because it's not anything on your claim. You might bill for that T1D as in a follow-up visit or something like that. But you should pull that keto into the problem list, which is a SNOMED code. And how often is that done? 5% of the time, 3% of the time, who knows?
Absolutely.
And why do you think it's not done?
Because I'll tell 2 reasons. Number 1, it requires discipline and diligence with every single kid, and you have to see 25 kids a day to keep your doors open. And so you're like, secondly, there's something that we're probably not going to talk about today, but I'm just going to mention it right now. Diabetes is one of I haven't counted, a dozen diagnoses that pediatricians are happy to go put over there with someone else. And so a DKA, hey, that's on my stuff. I'm going to let the endocrinologist, who probably doesn't even exist in your town, right? Okay. We're going to let endo deal with that. It becomes someone else's problem. And that's just human. That's just us saying we're feeling overwhelmed. We have too much to manage. And so something like tracking actual DKA is not easy.
But it does have a value. Like, even though
Yes,
into the office, so how's your diabetes? You're going to the endocrinologist far away. How's your blood
Yep.
sugar? So we made an engagement. Most physicians,
Yes.
well, I didn't manage the diabetes, so I'm not going to put it down. And then throw in the twist of I have to click 5 fields to put it in. I'm not going to bother.
exactly.
But it is
Exactly right.
important. It's important in pediatrics, especially for value-based contracts, because putting a kid, telling the insurance company that the kid has diabetes will give them a higher risk score. Given a higher risk score, now budgets more money for this patient in their value-based contract.
Now, let me ask you, I want to ask the 3 physicians on this call. You've all managed patients with diabetes to some extent, okay? And you've co-managed with endocrinologists. How well do your technical tools communicate with the endocrine partners that you have? Like, if a kid goes and sees an endocrinologist 3 times, one of the kids in your flock, a 12-year-old, who you saw for a well visit last year, goes to endo 3 or 4 times in 3 months. How often are you even aware of that?
So I'll tell you, from a non-pediatric EHR, it's a disaster, because I get information back in 2 ways through ECW. One is a PDF, and Fairfax uses Epic. So there's 12 pages of repetition of nonsense, right? And the nurse said that the kid passed gas twice. Okay. And then the medical student said no, it was 3 times. And then there's a paragraph, half a page, of the attending physician attesting to the supervision and the time. And I'm looking for, where's the time in range? And because it's a PDF, it's not in color, so I can't even see the graphic. And where's the hemoglobin A1C? And was this kid initially diagnosed in DKA or not? And I got to go through 12 pages. Half of it I can't read. And I'm sorry, I'm very negative on ECW. Yep. And on top of that, it's a little box, and I'm not a young person, so it's difficult to see that. And I can't put that box to a side so that I can read the PDF on one side and see the problem list on the other side. And that's one way I get it. And it's just unnerving. And on top of that, it goes into an inbox where whatever clinicians in the clinic helping will go through all of these reports and will sign off on them, that it's not linked to your patient that you're seeing at the time. Or they come in through an electronic interface, and it's even worse. It's this yellow and blue, and you can't find any narrative of what happened. Now, one of the things that we're missing in this conversation is that it's much better when you have a pediatric only EHR and you're a pediatrician. It just makes life a lot easier. But there's also a component that is missing. It's lack of the education of the pediatrician. So the reason that George is not clicking on that DKA into the problem list is because most general pediatricians don't understand the implications of a child presenting in DKA versus a child who doesn't present in DKA over the next 15 to 20 years of their lives. And that is I don't know how, from the EHR perspective, you educate your clients, this is a high risk factor. This is like somebody telling you, my dad died from hyperlipidemia and a heart attack when he was 45 years of age. You want to put that on the problem list because that kid needs to be screened for familial hyperlipidemia. And the diagnosis of DKA at presentation means you blew out your beta cells and you're going to have more episodes of hypoglycemia. You're going to be more difficult to have time in range or near target hemoglobin A1Cs, and you're going to have more complications because you're not well controlled. So now
Eric,
you,
one thing
yes,
that really caught me off guard was when my family, we were presented with our circumstance, and I would talk to my clients. All my clients are pediatricians. They're all interested in the topic. Hey, how are your kids? I'm like, I got a funny story to tell you. It was really fascinating to me to see the range of understanding about the story I was telling. I had some of my clients within 2 or 3 sentences knew what was going on. I said, my son did this, and they're like, oh my God, he's got diabetes. And then I had others, and I get to the end, and then I'm like, and then the glucose came back at 350, and they're like, and I'm like, type 1 diabetes. And they're like, oh yeah, it is the first time in my career I have discerned a significant knowledge gap among pediatricians. I've felt it with some behavioral stuff. And maybe that's partially because I also feel it as a non-clinician. Can't see how to manage depression or whatever. That's like over there. But with the stuff that can be measured by labs and measured by your eyes, and you can actually ask a few questions, and it's a, boy, I'm just going to be really dangerous when I say it. You guys can slap me and I will accept it. It seems to me that in most circumstances when it presents, it's obvious once you get some of the elements. Like there are three or four check boxes where you're like, literally we were at the hospital. My son showed up. He's, yep, I've had polyuria and polydipsia for 2 weeks. I've lost 35 pounds. We went through the whole thing. And they're like, so I guess we just need to take a blood test. He's, yep. And that's, I think there are pediatricians out there who would be like, ooh, I think we're going to have to give you a whole workup. I don't know what it is. And that's the first time in my career I've felt that from some. And Dan, I don't know if you see it, George and Herb, I don't know if you see it, but I was surprised in a couple instances about that.
You could slap me too for this,
Yeah.
but being the gray-haired doctor and having been at a time when we wrote our notes on paper, we didn't have near the degree of labs that we had. And we did this thing called physical exams and took histories and so forth. We relied on those bits of data, information to help to guide us. Now we rely on the lab to guide us. And let me just give you an example, all right? Recently had a patient who was less than 2 years of age and had some significant constipation and some growth issues, some delay in their height, and they had developed some arthritis. And so the pediatrician had sent them to the rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist ended up putting the child on methotrexate and blah, 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 and then steroids. And I finally said, whoa, wait a minute, time out. Do we understand that the mom has celiac disease? And have we thought about the fact that arthritis and the presentation of poor growth, distended abdomen, constipation, and now with arthritis, the kid likely has celiac disease, but they were relying on a test that was done 10 months ago. And they said, oh,
Yep.
that test was negative at the time in what was probably, I don't know, 14-month-old. All right. So that's a story.
Like more than half that kid's life ago.
Yeah, more than half that kid's life. All right. In his developing immune system. And so we tend to need to put down the EHR for a minute. We need to put down the pen. We need to take a look at the patient, look at the bigger picture and go, okay, let's think about this.
Right.
Once the child was taken off gluten, within 4 days, he was remarkably better. Oh.
And happy.
And so you are correct that we're relying on some things today and not putting enough emphasis on other things, but that
And
comes
those
from the
those
gray
things
haired back.
aren't good enough yet. We all see it. We all see what it can be. There will be a time in our lifetimes when the EHR, some other tool, is helping you with clinical decision making. It takes your input and says, hey, you didn't stop to think about celiac.
Mm.
Hey, this kid now probably needs an A1C lab.
That's right.
All right. But that time is coming. But a lot of people, the moment the EHR said one thing, they're like, oh, I don't have to think anymore. And we're all guilty of it. I want to be clear. I'm being critical.
All of us. Yeah.
It is. I am as guilty as
Thank
anybody.
you.
And who is more sympathetic as a non-pediatrician to what pediatricians have to go through than I am? All right. You guys can be empathetic to yourselves, but I'm sympathetic for what you have to go through. But it's not an excuse. You've got to use your brains. And I mean, if you don't keep using your brains, by the way, the computer's going to take your jobs. So you've got to be the difference between
machines.
Yeah. So
it's not going to happen that way, but you need to play your role. All right.
Yes. People need to learn again. I think it's the lost art of critical thinking. It's just in the type 1 space, for example, and I don't think this is that difficult, right? But if you have a young adolescent male whose hemoglobin A1C 6.2 and his BMI is in the normal range, why isn't your head spinning to go get the autoantibodies and fasting C peptides on that kid? I don't need to be an endocrinologist to do that. It just, phenotypically, he is a type 1 diabetic and he is dysglycemic. He could be stage 2. And until I have the C peptides and the autoantibodies, I don't know, but I want to check that box off before he goes into decay. Because a little bit of knowledge tells you that if he's a type 2, then he'll likely never have decay. Not impossible, but most likely not. So it's a different follow-up that you're going to do. How do we use the EHR to educate 30,000 clinicians about these changes that can have real effects on not only population health, but the outcomes of your patients?
Chip referred to it earlier, and we talked about it earlier. It really comes down to how we design care plans, or what I would call action plans, because we pediatricians are all used to using an asthma action plan. But as we structure the EHR, if it is to be a truly electronic health manager, then we are creating opportunities within the care plan, within the note, and AI is going to help with this, to nudge clinicians and help them to be thinking about those other possibilities. I would take your challenge wholeheartedly, Herb, that we need to be the educator. We need to be able to provide those resources, those clinical guidelines, etc., to nudge clinicians, essentially. Come out of your seeing 25 URIs that day and think about this specific patient.
Thoughts, Chip?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I'd only add, I would love it if the pediatricians who are in fact taking care of these kids were the drivers behind the development of those care plans. I would trust Dan Feitan's worldview of how to create a care plan for a kid with T1D over a committee's version of it. A committee made up of people who only see these kids in their academic settings. And these people are going to be mad at me. I'm not saying they're not smart. I'm not saying they're not capable, but I have been invited in as the EHR guy to so many meetings after committees have met for 2 years to define XYZ. You come in and you're like, what? Did you not talk to anyone in this business? That the form you've designed, this magic form that's going to take care of everything. Dan knows this, and George knows, the New York State school form. Like, what maniacs created that? Because it's a form literally designed not to be completed by a computer. It is the logic of the form doesn't work. The layout of the form doesn't work. And if you just had one developer in there, one designer in there, you'd be like, you can't, wait, you want people to actually use this? And same thing. I want the definition of these care plans. I want the definition of the protocols to be rooted in pragmatism and utility and not I don't mind picturing the golden space of what's possible. Like I want the coolest, but that is not what we roll out on day one. We just get people to put in the diagnosis coach. like we'd get the get the SNOMED codes in there. And at the very least, because Herb, you've said this to me, if this crew right here, if we could wave a magic wand and say, hey, guess what? A1C is now going to be done at whatever our ages we're doing these other blood draws. And that'd be awesome. And we would find some kids and keep some kids out of the hospital and keep some kids from dying. That's a fact. It's just a matter of like, how much overhead do we have to accept to do that? However, if we were just going to accept a minimum standard, which is if a kid gets type 1 diabetes, that kid's siblings get screened. Okay, which doesn't happen right now. That is not that I should actually, that's something you and I could go check. How many kids get a T1D, the first kid in the family to get T1D? Because you mentioned this right at the beginning of our podcast. How many of these kids go get T1D and how many of those other kids get checked? And that number is not 99%. All right. I bet that number is like 60%. All right. I'm guessing, but let's just get some standard things that say, go test these kids now. Let's cross that bridge first, and then I'll be excited. You know.
So you brought two things, and I'm gonna circle back. One is, what are your son's thoughts on the pediatricians or family practitioners and education, access, and number of clinicians?
Oh, he told me, I said, hey, we're going to have this podcast. Do you have any input? One of the things he said, first of all, let's be clear. It's hard to get into endo for a lot of people. So the pediatricians are going to be managing this, or it's not going to be managed at all. So the first thing is the pediatricians do need to become educated on this topic. Everyone hears, yep.
So let's think through.
All along.
So some of it could be nudges from the EHR. If family history, if somebody was good enough to put family history of type 1 diabetes on the problem list.
There's some clinical decision-making things in there. There's some educational
and the kid's 18 months, order the autoantibodies. That's just yes or no. So that would be one. But we're still humans.
Yep.
And so in my mind, that has to go along with echo programs. And the echo programs are the best way for adults to learn. And the ones that work really well bring in, as Chip was saying, somebody who's actually doing the work, a pediatrician, and somebody who is at a university center, a pediatric endocrinologist, really a pediatric diabetologist. And they meet together, a group of 12 once a month or twice a month, and they go over cases together.
He would also tell you that because the pediatrician endocrinologist loop is not, and this is obviously true, he doesn't see a pediatrician, he's a family physician, but it's the same thing there. Because that loop is not always, that circle isn't always completed, said we need better communication between the specialists and the pediatricians, which, by the way, could have been your number one podcast 25 years ago. I said, the pediatricians don't hear from the specialists. All right. Like that song is, we all know the notes to that song. And so he is experiencing it as a patient where the physicians are like, wait, your endo said what? And the endos, wait, and your doctor said what? And you're always playing catch up. And what he he struggles with a lot of the time is, among other things, is okay. Like a couple months ago, for those of us now who are aware of this journey, a couple months ago, there was a big CGM problem. Like you couldn't get CGMs depending on which brand you bought because one of the makers closed a factory. And for 2 or 3 months, you had to chase CGMs like you had to chase Adderall. All right. If you were a kid with ADHD drug, we've all heard those stories. You call the pharmacy, they can't tell you can have it. You run over there, they don't have it, but the other place across town does. So you have to call your doctor to go get the scripts in over there. So you race over. He ran through that game for 3 days trying to track down CGMs because part of it was no one could give him a straight answer. And in the physician's practice, his PCP couldn't give him a straight answer, and they weren't communicating with each other. And then to top it all off, because I hate insurance companies, he showed up at one place, they had the CGM, and they said, "Oh no, Cigna told us that you'd already picked it up at the other office, so we can't give you this one." Which of course he hadn't. Cigna had no idea what they were talking about. So his own insurance company blocked him from getting a CGM in order to check his blood sugar. God bless America right there. Okay. Because I almost lost my mind. He was like, "I got it. Take care of
So
it." I almost lost
the two of you are very big into technology, but I don't think there's a replacement for a face-to-face or on the phone conversation and that relationship that gets built up. And if you want to strengthen the relationship between the pediatric diabetologist and the pediatrician, there has to be a leader in the practice, in the general pediatrician's office, and a leader in the community that's a pediatric and diabetologist. And they break bread together every so often. They go over the cases and they
I love that
communicate.
idea, but
Um,
there are too many places where that just can't happen
Well,
because
relationship.
there is,
and what do you mean
because
that, like, to
the
rural,
diabetologist doesn't exist.
all the
It-
more reason, Chip, that we need that support, right? It may
Yeah.
be that the diabetologist, for example, I'm sure in some parts of Utah, the diabetologist is sitting in Denver.
Yeah.
And it may be a nurse practitioner, a family nurse practitioner, because that's all the town's got. But all the more reason to have that communication be strong. If you live in a big super city like I do, there's a lot of endocrinologists. It's just a matter whether you want to be sitting on the road for 45 minutes to get there. What do you think,
Um,
Dan?
yeah.
That's a challenge. First of all, there aren't enough diabetologists. Second, in a busy day of seeing X number of patients per day, those sorts of conversations are hard to have. But I think that using the societies to be able to communicate with them and track with them and work with them to make sure that we are working together from that perspective is reasonable to do. The one-on-one conversations, I would love to be able to pick up the phone and talk with the diabetologist. And actually, now that I think about it, I have a skewed perspective because they all know me down there, and I do just pick
Right.
it up, and they just,
That's
or
right.
I
Dan,
text.
you don't count for this thing.
Yeah, I'm a bad one to comment on this now that I'm.
And they probably call you half the time. So you're not a good example for this element of it. But yes.
I told you, Chip, you can text me anytime with your
You
diabetes
did.
questions.
First
Hey,
thing you
hey.
told me. You've lived through things that I can't imagine.
And so Dan, what do you mean by the associations? What do you think
So-
is missing?
No, I think that they themselves are trying to address and look at what do we do with kids and early screening of type 1 diabetes. And as this resolution, in fact, you need to talk about the resolution, Herb, that's going around and let everybody know about it. But as people have begun to put support behind resolutions for screening of kids, we need to be in communication with those folks, is what I meant. I don't
So
want
you
to change
think-
the subject, but I want to make
No,
sure
no. I think
people
it's
know
very
about
important. So I
this
think
resolution.
it's important that the American Academy of Pediatrics have a statement.
Now,
Yeah.
why is that important?
What's that?
Why is that important? Because pediatricians will not do anything until they're told to do something by the AAP. Otherwise, they'll push it to the specialist. The
Yeah.
specialist is not going to see the kid that's going to be sick in a year. He's going to wait for him to be sick today, then see them. So we need
Yes.
something for the AAP to give some guidance to general PD on how to screen. And then if we have to screen, the doctors need a process that's easy. They need something that doesn't take too much time. And you know what? They should be paid for it too. What are your thoughts, Herb, with the resolution?
Yeah, so there's a resolution that hopefully will make it to the leadership conference this year, calling for the American Academy of Pediatrics to endorse ISPADS, which is the International Society of Adolescent Pediatric Diabetes standards of care, in which they call for offering every family antibody screening at the ages of 1 to 2 and then 4 to 6 years of age. The word offering is very important because we want to make it a choice between the family and the pediatrician. Some people that have a strong family history of type 1 diabetes don't want to get the autoantibodies tested. And I think you need to respect that from the parent's perspective. And also that the academy advocate for a G code so that when the pediatrician orders the autoantibodies, they're paid for the screening itself because it's going to entail looking at those results and knowing how to decipher whether they're negative, whether it's one autoantibody positive or two autoantibody positives, and what that means for what you need to do to manage that. Because only 1 in 300 kids will test positive, you're going to do 299 negatives, which is time from the pediatrician. And we can't ask our primary care physicians, whether they're family practice, pediatricians, pediatric nurse practitioners, family nurse practitioners, to do more. The studies already say that if we follow a preventive guidelines from our associations, we would need 27 hours a day to carry a normal panel in our office. So we can't do it without payment and we can't do it without time. I'm very optimistic that this resolution will be presented in late July, August in Chicago, and that the Academy will endorse it because I think, yeah, we do need the Academy to have a statement on this.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if nothing else, or because resolutions, just like that after school or schoolhouse rock, I'm just a bill. Some of the resolutions have to come up multiple times, but every time it comes up is an opportunity for education. It's an opportunity for people to understand this. And look, 2 years ago, product showed up on the market, Fortis, that addresses the single biggest boogeyman in a pediatric practice, RSV. It's the thing that scares you guys the most, but it should. And now, second year, there were a couple problems that first year, but now it's almost normalized. Most practices are using it, and holy smokes, does it work. RSV hospitalizations fell off the table, which is awesome. And at some point, with the apparent increase in T1D that's happening among kids, this boogeyman, DKA, is going to replace those RSV kids. I see this one going up and this one coming down. And we need to educate people that we have an opportunity to catch them before it gets bad. It's not like RSV that happens in a couple of hours. Okay. This is something that happens over a couple of days or weeks, and you can catch it in most kids. And if we catch it, we can study and we can do some things that might actually someday solve this problem for people. And so I heard, even if the resolution, I almost called it a bill, even if the resolution doesn't pass, having that conversation out loud in front of a bunch of people and saying, look at how prevalent this is. You have 1,000 kids on average. I don't know what the number is. I should, but of 1,000 kids right now, you got 24 of them who are T1D. All right. And depending on where and when you caught them, they may be permanently damaged, or they may not be managing it well. They may be struggling, and you play a role in that. Just as Dan points out, just like you do for your asthmatic. And so I don't know. I don't follow all the machinations of why certain resolutions pass and certain ones don't, but I do know that every single time they come up. All right. So the people soap them 2 days after everything goes through. Someone's going to go through and post all the resolutions, and everyone's going to talk about them. And it will be, in my knowledge, the first time any meaningful T1D conversation is had on soap.
That was like a no-brainer. There's no reason why it should pass.
I think you're right, but there's that one little thing you said, which has to give us all pause, and that is, yeah, we got to get paid, and
the money.
Yeah, the money, because the money is it, and I like you guys know this. It's not about more money in your pocket. It's so I can go hire more people to make this actually happen in my practice. So I can pay for the machine that does this, because it needs to be sustainable and viable. And frankly, okay, all those people whose businesses pay tens of thousands of dollars a year for their healthcare insurance, they're the ones who benefit. Should get paid. And that's the obstacle. That's what the fight about.
The only obstacle I see on this is with little children. because the test itself is a VE stick, venipuncture.
Mhm.
And just like with the lead testing, you would order it, and patients will not take their child a nebulous boogeyman disease that may come, may not come. So
Right.
they're not going to go. There has to be some kind of a test that's done in office, like the lead screening, which is very important. And then the physician practice should be paid because the machine's going to cost money, the reagents are going to cost money, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And
I don't have a good sense of that, but
So-
obviously,
so-
if the academy holds up a light and says, "Hey, everyone needs to be headed towards this light," which is, I don't know, A1C testing,
Mhm.
some lab company is going to be like, "Bingo,
Okay,
we
so,
can make that." That's I have no idea what that.
so the light is auto body testing right now.
Okay.
There's 4 auto bodies. Now, you've done this for longer than I have, Chip, but you've seen,
Yep.
I don't know how many thousands of pediatric offices. You've seen one. Each
Yep.
one is so different. So you can't do it in the office through Enable Bio and get the 4 autoantibodies, and I think celiac disease testing. Just it's a card, just like the newborn screens. The problem is that New York State does not allow the use of Enable Bio in New York State. So in New York State, you cannot do it that way. Many other states, you can do it that way in the office if that's what you choose to do. Then there's the craziness of our patchwork of healthcare systems. So if you're sitting in Rochester, there's only 1.5 health systems, and they have an absolute monopoly, and 1 insurance company, and they have an absolute monopoly. There's not even a LabCorp or a Quest in Rochester because they're not allowed to be there because the insurance company and the health system have decided they don't want the competition.
Upstate New York, I think, is from a health insurance perspective, maybe top 5 most corrupt parts of the United States. I can't believe that the Attorney General hasn't come into it. The monopoly held by Blue Cross up there is insane.
Yeah,
And
70% of the market.
Yeah, and they don't list. They do whatever they want, and
Yeah.
it's a non-profit insurance company. What a joke!
If you're
So,
in
yeah.
Virginia, it makes perfect sense. You have better compliance if you do in the office point of care testing. Everybody knows that. However, in Virginia, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield has a capitated program with LabCorp for their labs. So if you do the hemoglobin and lead screening in the office, you don't get paid. They all have to go to LabCorp. And then
It's
that's
all-
part of
it's-
the, that's
or-
part of
it's
the
like
HIDIS,
organized crime.
that's part of the HIDIS measure. So you get the letters back. Could you please do better? Because we're not screening enough leads and the state is breathing down our neck. Pay me to do it in the office.
Yep.
Because people don't want to go to LabCorp after they see you for the well child exam. So, those are some of the intricacies. I think that having a resolution passed at the academy will move us in the right direction. But each practice and each state and each maybe county will be different depending on the resources that they have. But it's going to take a community and those people that are in the pediatric EHR space will play a really big role because of the numbers you have and the commitment to taking care of pediatricians and making sure that kids stay healthy. Other companies don't have that commitment. They make money off of orthopedic surgeons and cataract surgeons and dermatologists, where their margins are so much higher
Yep.
and the process is different. It'll be very nice. And I think you're right, Chip. Even if we don't get it to pass, but if we get 300 pediatric leaders at once to look at this topic and to implement it or to think about implementing it and then discussions in the list servers, we've already won. And I'm a little more concerned about what happens once the kid screens positive. Because as you mentioned before, and the guidelines now there are consensus guidelines by academics. It is a very complex algorithm that they put down. It's based on number of autoantibodies and your age. And that dictates how often you should have that child come back for a glycemic screening. And that's got to be pared down to where if you're under 9, you come in 4 times a year, you get educated on DKA, you get a spot glucose and a hemoglobin A1C that can now be done in the office if you want to. Because if you're splitting it up so much, there's just no way. There's no way you're seeing 25 patients and you're going to see one of these kids once or twice a month. And you're going to say, oh, wait, what? This kid's 2 years old. I'm supposed to see him every 3 months, but the sibling's 6. I only need to see him twice a year. And the other sibling's 10. I only need to see him once a year. That's not going to happen. That's going to be a tough one to how do we put that into the EHRs and educate people.
I would add to that, sorry, George, is that we've seen the asthma action plan evolve over time with new medications, new treatments, et cetera. I would say that we have to start somewhere, even if it's a little bit more complex, and we then can give feedback and help to refine the issues. We got to get started with those sorts of things. George, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
I wonder what role, I'm just talking, a kid that screens out positive for the autoantibodies that you think, you do a consult with the parents and you think you're going to develop diabetes sometime in the future and you want to prevent DKA. What role would those continuous glucose monitors have on that kid, where you could do some remote monitoring from the office and keep a watch on these things? And then once you start to see a spike up, it's red alert. What do you think of that?
There certainly are people who are looking at that, and there are studies going on for that. That, again, trying to implement that through the practice might be easy from an endocrinologist or a diabetes center, but the number of questions that you're going to get when the CGM doesn't work that evening and they call the doctor on call and say, what am I supposed to do? So there's complexities there from a technology and hardware perspective.
Yeah, I remember our first weekend with the CGM, and it was horrifying.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, but George has a point though.
Yeah.
We're not ready for that today, but there will be a time in the near future when your Apple Watch or whatever is telling you, hey, you need to go talk to your doctor right now, or you need to go tell your school nurse right now. And that time is coming. And the work that we're talking about here will pave the way there.
Yeah.
People have to recognize the importance or the impact of the T1D stuff for this to really have it.
And George brings up he brings up a good point. People are going to demand it. They're going to insist that I have these tools.
So Barbara Davis, I think, is doing some studies with that. And one of the ways they minimize the stress on the pediatrician is they do blinded CGMs. And it's very controversial. Some of the families don't like the idea of being blinded. But in essence, you've got the machine, because this child is not requiring insulin, will not have pathologic lows, hypoglycemia. What you're looking for is a trend that they're becoming dysglycemic. So you can blind the monitor, and then the pediatrician, the peds endo are the only ones seeing the data and figuring out when the kid's ready for insulin before DKA. That's one way they're in it, but the families, some don't like it. They want to know the data. It's their data. They want to have access to it. You can now buy one without a prescription and put it on yourself and a text to your cell phone. So they're like, why are you preventing me from seeing my own data? But that will probably be the future, right? More monitoring of our bodies through different gadgets.
This is called population health. And you're talking about getting paid for a simple test. Brain, and this is probably a general pediatric job, because you're going to have all these kids that may be getting sick in the future. The endocrinologist has to deal with the people that are actually sick today, not the slew of people that may have it. They really won't get an appointment with an endocrinologist. And I'm sure there's some centralized web portal that does these things. And then I know there's remote monitoring codes now. That could be a really cool thing to do in office.
We need it. It boils down to demand. Right now, we have our industry has an almost completely reactionary position vis-a-vis type 1 diabetes. We all wait for a kid to hit a wall before we do anything. In pediatrics, unlike the almost entire scope of healthcare, a couple exceptions, but pediatrics is fundamentally about preventive care. How do we keep this from happening? Or if it's going to happen, how do we keep it from getting worse? How do we minimize the impact that it has on this kid's development future? And so we need to raise attention to it. We need to create demands for these solutions. And I say all this knowing full well, now I'm more familiar with the diabetic community has been screaming about this forever. They've been demanding. I mean, ask anyone who's going to pump, and they're like, the work they had to do to make pumps happen to make it important enough for us to focus on it. Dan, this like in your blood, right? And I'm like, I'm a latecomer. I come along. I'm like, oh my God, we should have paid more attention to it. This is what it's going to take. Everyone's going to have to scream about it the whole way.
And our biggest cheerleader is Dr. Bravo.
I don't think
it's true.
so.
There we go.
I don't
think
so.
Thanks
I
to
think
her.
There's a lot of people in this community. There's a lot of people in this community that are very genuinely committed to finding the cure.
Yes,
Yeah.
they are. But you need to get the message out, and you're very loud, so you get the message out.
I am very loud.
Consistent. He's very
You've done
consistent.
a great job, Herb.
Thank you,
Yep.
guys. You're
Thank
very
you.
kind.
Yep.
It's a horrible disease. And as Chip said, as pediatricians, we work to prevent disease day in, day out. And nothing gives us more joy than when we work ourselves out of a job, right? There's almost no
Yep.
ear infections anymore. There's no meningitis anymore. And that's just, I hope for a day when there won't be any more diabetes, or maybe diabetes will be like AIDS. You take a pill once a week and things are stable. It's a chronic disease that doesn't demand so much out of the families.
Doctors
Yep.
will look at it. We get rid of this disease. I'll have nothing to do. You know what? I've watched diseases come and go. I still have things to do all the time.
Yeah.
I remember when it first came out with the Prevnar vaccine. One of my partners, Dr. Belvin, says, wow, this vaccine, this could put pediatrics out of business in the future.
The same group
No.
of people who need 27 hours a day to supposedly do their jobs. There's right now, the teenage well visit coverage in this country is like 65, 70%. Okay. There is so much work to do. It's just that, you know what? Treating otitis was easy. That's what upset people. I can treat otitis. All right. I can treat otitis with a 99% effectiveness that you do. All right. Because if I screw it up, the kid's still fine. Next up, as we eliminate this stuff that's preventable, now we're bumping into heavier weight elements like type 1 diabetes, like behavioral health, like obesity. These are going to be harder, but that's like Google can do otitis. All right.
I'll put a monetary spin on it. Why did the doctors like the otitis?
Because you could do 8 an hour.
That's
That's what-
much. It's a little bit much, but you did bang
I've
out.
seen it
a lot.
done. You've seen it done, but you can do 6 an hour of otitis.
Yeah. And then, but the reimbursement was low. So now you're asking for the same reimbursement for a longer visit. And that
Payment.
is the problem. Payment is
Yes.
the problem. So
So, Dan, any thoughts as we start closing out the episode so that
No, I think that we, PCC and are committed to prevention. It's in our blood, if I can say it that way. And so we understand probably better than most of the other EHRs why using type 1 diabetes as an example to form and to create systems that are not only giving us the ability to screen, but also to track, to monitor, and to educate clinicians. And I'm excited about the conversation because that's where both companies are going, and it's a great opportunity for us.
yeah.
Yep. And we absolutely welcome the competition from Office Practicum to be the best type 1 diabetes EHR. Everyone wins when that happens. I look forward to Dan calling me and saying, guess what we just did? Because then we're going to have to do it. And then and what that means is we're going to drag all of the other EHRs who only care about the hospitals and the derm and everyone like that. We're going to drag them to us. All right. That's what it's going to take.
Those EHRs, they're still writing electronic progress notes and sending them billing statements. That's what they are. You guys
Yep.
are an electronic health population management system.
Yes.
That's what we need.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Not a progress note.
Yes. Yeah, and we're both imperfect. We both are works in progress. We have so much that we wish we can do. One day, one step. And this,
Yeah.
this
You know what?
topic is good.
Ed,
Yes. Chip, don't you?
you said something very smart to me. When I
Yeah.
first got involved with the electronic medical scribing,
Yeah.
it was so good. I had asked you, I said, Dan, this is so good. It writes my entire progress note. I'm thinking, why do I even need an EHR anymore if this can write my progress note? And you said to me, but there's all the stuff in between, the population health, diagnosis, the clicking, all the managements. That's why you need the EHR, not for progress.
Right.
And you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
Thank you. I don't think that in any other space other than with your companies and pediatricians could we have such a candid conversation
Yep.
on the challenges and the opportunity to use type 1 diabetes as a roadmap for collaboration and for population health and for getting closer to a cure. And this is why I'm a pediatrician, because of people like you guys in the room who share that belief that together we can make children's lives better, even if we only have small steps to take today.
Yep.
And so I thank you all.
I'm not going anywhere. I got another
What?
35 years in me. Right?
Well,
So I don't know
we
about
all,
that, but
we all do
but-
little steps at a time, right?
That's-
We got to
it's-
start walking.
that's pediatrics is about dozens of small interactions and small changes that you make. It's influencing families a little bit at a time. It's not reattaching an arm or dissecting. It's not like taking someone's organs out and replacing them. You have a relationship with these families that's different, measured over decades, and you make many small incremental changes. And that's what we're doing here as in our EHR community.
Chip, you and I have had some good conversations, but I'm not sure yet we have discussed the feeling that we live maybe on a daily, weekly basis, and that is a feeling of impatience. We see the possibilities. We know the roadblocks. We know what old code, old ways of doing things need to be changed, etc. And so we constantly have this feeling of impatience, but in a positive way. It drives us.
Yep.
It's what
Yep.
makes us move further to create those solutions for complicated diseases like diabetes.
All right.
Well,
Totally agree.
thank you, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all soon somewhere.
Very
All right.
good.
Well, thank you very much.
All right.
Talk to you all soon.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Take care
Bye-bye.
now.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Please visit our sponsor. Incredible conversations like the one today can't happen without their support.